We have major breaking news today out of the United States Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court has announced the fate of two Supreme Court cases. That's Viramontes versus Cook County and Duncan versus Bonta. Viramontes versus Cook County is probably the most important one. It's the AR-15 ban case. It should be at least, a slam dunk win for our side. And Duncan versus Bonta is like the large capacity magazine ban case. There's an additional kind of technicality in it having to do with the taking clause, but basically it's a large capacity magazine ban case. So we're going to talk about what the Supreme Court did, why it kind of should concern you, and kind of a surprising aspect of this whole thing. But yeah, we're going to get into that in just a second. Before we do, if you're new here, please subscribe down below and let's get into it. Okay, so again, we have two different cases, and the Supreme Court made the same decision for both. The cases weren't denied. They weren't granted cert, which means to be essentially taken by the court to be heard. Instead, they were relisted for conference. I think the next conference is like February 20th. So there's a little bit of almost a month gap between when the next opportunity is for them to be granted cert. For those of you who don't know, basically what happens essentially is all the Supreme Court justices get in a room, nobody else in there, and they discuss which of the cases they're going to take. And you need 4 votes, so 4 out of the 9 to be in order for a case to get heard. So it's a pretty low bar, but the Supreme Court justices aren't stupid. They're pretty tactical with how they do it. And it's pretty normal, especially under the Roberts Court, for cases to get relisted like a ton of times. Like we've seen them get relisted literally like 5-10 times. I mean, this is not that unusual, but it's happened a lot. And at this point, it's starting to get a little bit concerning. So what case did the Supreme Court decide to take? What was so important that they decided to take this case instead of, one involving our fundamental constitutional rights, especially, AR-15 bans, right, which is super important, and large capacity magazine bans, which is important, but I'm not as worried about that one because that one's, I think, a little bit more obvious. Not that, of course, AR-15 bans aren't obvious, but I think that one's like really, really, really cut and dry, so I'm not as worried about that one. So what did they decide to take? This case is so insanely boring, I literally can't remember the name without looking at the screen, so I'm about to tell you what it is. It's Salazar versus Paramount Global, involving an interpretation of the Video Privacy Protection Act in the context of digital video viewing and data sharing. That's what they decided to take. So they couldn't deal with the issue of AR-15 bans. No, they had to deal with the Video Privacy Protection Act in the context of digital viewing and data sharing about whether the plaintiff qualifies as a consumer and related definitional issues that affect liability for sharing viewing history identifiers. I'm serious. I'm not making that up. I'm not joking. That's what they decided to take. They also GVR'd Nelly versus Michigan, but that's a little bit less important. But yeah, this is where we stand. It is important to recognize, of course, that the Supreme Court did grant cert to U.S. versus Khamenei earlier, which is the unlawful substance case. It's honestly kind of almost a bigger deal. And of course, they granted Wolford versus Lopez, which is the vampire rule one. Essentially, Hawaii was restricting your ability to carry a gun unless the property owner gave you express permission. But again, I think those are honestly more fringe. I think the AR-15 ban one is one of the most important things to get set in stone. No, you cannot ban AR-15s. No way, no how. I mean, the fact that we're even having this discussion honestly is worrying. You would think this would have been dealt with 200 years ago. This is so obvious. You obviously cannot ban AR-15s. What are we talking about here? But anyway, this isn't actually as much of a surprise maybe as you might expect from the way I'm talking about it. The reality is most people didn't think that these two cases were going to get accepted. The Supreme Court's already accepted 2, and they usually accept 2 or 3, maybe 4 Second Amendment cases. So the reality is we are kind of filled up on them, at least for this current term. We might be able to get one more, but I think it's relatively unlikely. The reality is, when you look at the Supreme Court as a whole, they do have so much to focus on. A lot of the time, the Supreme Court gets so much hate, right? So much hate. And a lot of it is warranted, to be honest, but a lot of it also isn't. The reality is, as much, if I'm making fun of, the Video Protection Privacy Act case, someone has to decide that. And if there's a circuit split on it, the Supreme Court kind of has to take precedence on that issue. As much as I hate it, right? If I was in charge, we would have, 70 cases and 35 of them would be Second Amendment cases, right? The NFA would be gone and you'd have machine guns and it'd be awesome. But the reality is, that's not where we are, right? At a certain point, you have to be realistic, look at the composition of the court, and see what you can get the votes for and what you can't get the votes for. And right now, they are just not that aggressive, relative at least to how aggressive I would be. Relative to other courts, though, they're doing a much better job. So Honestly, I can't complain, at least in that aspect. But yeah, I do think it is really, really important to look at these order lists when they come out and kind of understand them, at least in that context, right? The Supreme Court does have a lot on their plate, and they can't take everything. Again, not excusing it at all. I'm the most principled Second Amendment guy you'll ever find, but it's just the reality, right? The Supreme Court has kind of carried the Second Amendment movement on their back, in the last decade, right? As legislatures and state houses have gone against us. So to some degree, they kind of get the credit for a lot of our movement's progress in the last decade or so. But anyway, hope you did enjoy the video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Really, really appreciate you all. Really hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you in the next one.